Well, good evening, my friends, and welcome back. Cumberland Outdoorsman out here once again at my shooting bench with a couple of vintage Remingtons that I'd like to feature. And let me just first of all offer my apologies for not posting any videos lately, but I'll tell you, the weather just hasn't wanted to cooperate, because every time I think I get a chance to come out here, it starts raining. You know, it's rained every weekend, and it's been so terribly hot and humid here that it's not good for the camera equipment, and it's also not good for my old vintage rifles to bring them out here because they sweat so badly, and I'm afraid they're going to get a coating of rust on them. I'll have to take everything apart and dry everything and lubricate. It's just, the opportunity just hasn't arisen until now. Today it's a little drier, not nearly as hot, no rain, so I wanted to take this opportunity to bring to you a vintage rifle that was sent to me by my good friend Wayne Jenkins. Now, before I go on, he told me this gun had some issues, and this is a perfect example and a perfect opportunity to illustrate why Remington had such a bad reputation about their triggers. And the one that comes to mind mostly is the Remington Model 700. Now, this is a Model 788 chambered in 243. It's got these scope mounts on it here, but one of the issues that this rifle had, and my good friend, he warned me about it, is that upon closing the bolt, as you can see, it's not loaded, and the magazine is empty. It has a detachable magazine box, but upon closing the bolt, the striker is not captured by the sear, okay? And the first time I took it out here, I closed the bolt, and right after I closed it, I heard something go snap. Well, what's happening is this gun must have been put away in a closet somewhere and never really taken care of before my good friend Wayne got a hold of it. And that's one of the reasons he sent it to me. When Remington made these rifles, the Remington 788 series of rifles, the reason I say series is because it was chambered in so many different calibers, from the 222, the 223, the 22-250, the 243, like this one here, the 6mm Remington, the 7mm 08, the 308 Winchester, and the 30-30, and I think even the 44 Magnum. There was an offering by Remington in this budget-priced bolt-action rifle that actually proved to be a very accurate and very dependable gun. Now, the issue with the Remington 788 was the same issue that some of these 580, 540, and 590, the 591, 592 series rifles, they all shared the same issue. And that's because when Remington assembled the trigger mechanisms, like on this Model 581 here, you can see that this trigger, you can hear it now. See, it's working freely. That's because I took it apart and I cleaned it. I took it completely apart and went through everything and cleaned it out, and very lightly oiled everything, lubed everything, but very lightly. And that's because that's what you're supposed to do. You know, a gun is just a mechanical device, just like anything else, just like your car. You wouldn't keep driving your car for year after year after year without changing the oil or doing a tune-up. I mean, you wouldn't do that, would you? I mean, if you do, your car's not going to last very long, and it could cause mechanical failure. Well, this Remington 788 has the same trigger mechanism as that 581 there does. It's in an aluminum housing And when Remington assembled these triggers, what they did is they employed a type of grease, a pasty grease, that with time hardens and becomes really thick and sticky. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to go ahead and take this bolt out. I'll be taking the bolt apart as well. But remember how that Model 581 trigger was freely working back and forth? Watch this. See that? It's very slowly coming back to position. And the way that works is the trigger engages the sear. This hand here is the corner of the trigger, okay? And then the sear comes down and is held in place by the trigger. That way when you squeeze the trigger, it travels forward, okay? Because it's on a hinged pin. When you squeeze the trigger back, it hinges forward, thereby releasing the sear. The sear drops, and then the striker goes forward and fires the gun. And what's happening is that grease that's built up inside that housing is not allowing the sear to fully engage the trigger, the top of the trigger, okay? And that can create an extremely dangerous situation, and I'm really glad that I got this rifle out here because I wanted to illustrate that point. It's the same issue that the Model 700 suffered from back when there were so many lawsuits against the Model 700. It's because Remington built those triggers. There's nothing wrong with the Remington 700 trigger. Mechanically speaking, it's an excellent design. The problem is the steel that the trigger was made out of was not a hardened steel like the 788 or the 580 series or the 590 or the 540 series rifles. However, they put a hardened L-shaped bracket. I think they call it a connector bracket, something like that. Well, folks, before I go any further, I've got a breakdown here of the Remington trigger mechanism. This is a Model 700, which is very similar to the 788, the 580 series, the 540 series, the 590s. And that being because it's a collection of parts that are housed inside of a trigger housing, okay? Whether that's aluminum or steel, doesn't really matter. Either way, the design is basically the same in all of them. I'll go ahead and blow this up and show you here what I'm talking about. There's the housing. This right here is the trigger, and that right there is the trigger connector. That's that piece I was telling you about. And as you can see, if you look at the top of that, it's bent over into kind of an L bracket, an L-shaped bracket. And it actually cradles over the trigger just like that. You know, it fits it perfectly. It comes up, and then it's bent over the trigger like that. And what happens with time, because that connector is not solidly fixed to the trigger, it's just held pretty much in place by spring tension from one of the adjusters, where the adjuster goes up against it, and the spring tension is what's pushing it against the trigger, and that's what holds it in place. What happens in time is you'll get debris, and that grease that Remington put in there will get between the trigger and that bracket, that connector, and it creates a gap, okay? It opens it up. And by opening it up, what you've got here is the trigger, for example, and then this is the connector that fits over the top. And then you've got the sear that engages the top of that connector, like that, fully engages it when it's in good working condition. And as that debris builds up between the connector and the trigger, that gap opens up, thereby causing a situation where the sear is not fully engaged and it's just barely hanging on to the edge of the connector. And then one day it gets to the point where, you know, you've got the safety on and it's just barely touching right there. You flip the safety off or the rifle gets jarred or something, then that connection right there is broken. The sear falls or drops, and that's what was holding the firing pin right here. You know, that's what was blocking the firing pin. And by dropping, of course, the firing pin is going to travel forward and hit the primer and fire the rifle. And that's the dangerous situation that I'm trying to illustrate. So, you know, you have to maintain these guns just like anything else. You have to keep them in good working condition. So I think if I illustrate this to you at my workbench, you'll at least be aware of how that mechanism is supposed to operate safely, and you'll know whether or not your gun needs to be serviced. Whether you do it yourself, I can show you step by step how it's done, or you can take it to a reputable gunsmith, somebody that knows what they're doing. Make sure you are certain of that before you do it. Don't take it to some fly-by-night so-called gunsmith that is just trying to earn a quick buck. Make sure you find somebody that knows what they're doing and can put your gun back together so it's working right. So let's go to the workbench and let's tear this little rifle apart, and I'll show you a little bit more about it. Well, my friends, here we are in my den, and I've got this little rifle here ready to take apart, and we're going to clean out all of the internal workings of the trigger mechanism. But first, we need to make sure that it's not loaded. Just open the bolt, make sure that there's no ammunition. We'll take the magazine out, lay it aside. Let me pan down here so you can see what I'm doing. And if you own a model 788, a model 580, 81, 82, 540 series like the 541S or the 541T, the 590 series rifles, the way you take the bolt out is you push the safety all the way forward, and then the bolt just slides right out. Okay? What that does is it depresses a plunger that comes down, and that plunger rides in that groove right there. There's a little groove inside that bolt, and it stops that bolt from coming all the way out when you cycle the action. But either way, we'll go ahead and remove the screws that hold the action in. Find the right blade here for the screws. Okay, I think we have just what we need right here. Yep, that's it. I'm going to leave the scope mounts attached because I'll be mounting a scope to this rifle just to get it ready for deer season. I'll probably do a refinish job on this little rifle next year, but for now I'm just going to give it a test run the way it is. It's got some rust pitting on it, but nothing that's going to hamper the way it functions. Okay, we got both action screws out and we got the trigger guard off. Now it's just a matter of removing the action from the stock. Just like that. Get some of this junk out of my way here. Alright, Okay, this is the same trigger mechanism as you find on the 580 series rifles. Okay, let me move the camera a little closer here. It's got an aluminum housing, and everything under here looks pretty good. As you can see, there's a little bit of rust pitting here on the receiver, but I'm going to clean all that off when the time comes and do a re-bluing job. Okay, first thing we need to do is back off this set screw right here. You always want to take the tension off this trigger mechanism before you drive out this retaining pin that's right here. Okay? Because that pin is the only thing that holds the trigger to the action. Okay, before you start beating on this action and trigger housing here, you need to make sure you support everything, because if you break off that tang right there, you're in a world of hurt. That means you'll have to have it re-welded, and that takes some very precise work because it has to go back exactly the way it came off. Okay, what I like to use is a small block of wood. This board right here will work just fine. You just want something to support that trigger housing when you put pressure on this here. Okay, so we'll put that board in place, and we'll go ahead and drive out this pin here. That's the top pin that sits right up against the action there. And this is what I'm talking about, folks. That goopy grease that's on there is real sticky and hard, and it's caked all over the bottom of the receiver here. And this is the piece I was talking about right here. Make sure you don't break that off. I don't know if you can see that or not. Let me zoom in on that. Right here. The little piece that's got the hole in it, that's part of the action right there, part of the receiver. Make sure you take care of that. Okay, what I'm going to do here is totally disassemble this trigger mechanism, and we're going to soak it overnight to loosen up all this stuff, and then tomorrow we'll put it back together. Because I'll tell you what, I mean, I could just soak it the way it is now, but to really do a good job, this needs to be taken apart. Alright, first thing we need to do is take off these little E-clips here. Set that out of the way. And make sure you keep up with all these little parts. Alright folks, I went and got a little container here to put all these parts in, because we're going to be soaking them anyway, and that way we can also keep up with everything. I'm going to put a little bit of kerosene at the bottom of this container here. That's where we'll soak all our parts. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and remove this safety latch here. Soak it in kerosene, both pins that hold that in, and the detent for the safety. There's a spring with a little detent pin that goes right into that hole right there. Okay? And then this here just lifts right out. There's a spring. This is your bolt retainer right here. The bolt retaining pin. And when you push forward on the safety, that depresses this plunger down, thereby releasing the bolt. My fingers are just sticky from all the gummed up grease here. Okay, now the only thing I have to do is take this pin out that removes the trigger itself. Notice how I use that wooden block. Wow, this thing is really stuck in there. No wonder it was hanging up. It's absolutely coated, just sticky like glue. And here is the return spring for the trigger. And we'll go ahead and remove the sear. Take out the sear pin that it swivels on and remove the sear. And there is the aluminum housing for the model 788, the 540 rifles. Well, sort of. They have one that's very similar to this. The 580 and the 590 series Remington bolt-action rifles. Now I'm going to let this soak overnight, and we'll be back with you tomorrow. Well, my friends, here we are the next morning, and I went ahead and took all the parts out of this container that I had where I kept them soaked overnight, and I've got everything laid out here after I've cleaned it. And one task that I completed was to be able to clean this receiver here where the grease had built up on the bottom of the receiver, and it was just real gummy and stuck on there like glue almost. So I took a toothbrush, an old toothbrush like that, soaked it in the kerosene and just went over it, you know, brushed it off, and then I wiped it off and dried it. So now the receiver is clean enough to receive the trigger group. And I've got everything laid out here, but there is one point of this video that I didn't cover, and I should probably go over because you might be faced with this situation. This is the bolt, and as you can see, that's the face of the bolt where the head of the cartridge sits against. These are the locking lugs. The model 788 has the locking lugs in the rear. The model 700 is much like the Mauser action, where it has two opposing locking lugs on the front. But either way, these locking lugs go into the action or into the receiver, and when you turn that bolt down, they engage mortises inside of the receiver, and that's what locks the bolt in place, so that when the explosion from the cartridge goes off, the bolt's not shoved rearward into your face. You know, it locks everything in place and keeps the cartridge where it needs to stay. Now, inadvertently, sometimes you may find yourself having to recock the firing pin because this is under tension here. But I can show you real quick how you can take this bolt apart and strip it down and clean it, at least to be able to get to the spring and clean the spring out. On the model 788, the factory very conveniently put a little hole right there that's at the tip of my finger. And what you can do, I take a punch like this. This is a 5/32 punch. And you want to put it right at the very end of this slot right here in the cocking piece, and you want to advance it a little bit more, like that. Okay, you want to take it out of that detent right there. And then you can take a thin punch, like the one I have here. This one here is a 1/16. And then you can insert it into the hole right here, all the way through. And you can unscrew the cocking piece with the firing pin and the mainspring intact. I've already cleaned this one, but I just wanted to show you how to take this down. I brushed this down with some kerosene. You can use any kind of cleaning fluid, and then re-lubed it after I dried it. And then to reassemble it, all you have to do is screw it back into the bolt body. To the same position where you had it before. Remove the pin and then rotate it down to the detent right here. Now, if for some reason it became uncocked and the sear right here, the striker, went all the way into the camming section of the bolt, I'll go ahead and do it here, like that. You're not going to be able to get this bolt back into the action. Okay, so all you have to do is get your punch. This, like I said, is a 5/32. Just put it into the rear of that slot right there, and then just rotate it back into position, and there you have it. Okay, now it's time to go ahead and reassemble the trigger group, and I'm going to go ahead and pan down here and show you all the parts. Okay folks, here are all the components that are housed inside of this trigger housing. I think it might be made out of magnesium or some type of aluminum. I'm not really sure. It's something other than steel. But either way, here we have the trigger. This is the sear. Here we have the safety latch, and it also doubles as the bolt release lever because it engages this right here, which is the bolt release pin and the bolt guide. Okay, here's the bolt, and this is where it rides, right here in this groove. This keeps the bolt straight inside the action. And this is the spring that accompanies that bolt release pin. Then here we have the trigger spring, this longer spring here. Here is the safety detent spring, and there's the safety detent plunger. And here we have a series of pins. There are two large flat-headed pins and one larger diameter pin that holds the sear into the action, and then two retaining pins, one for the trigger group itself and one for the trigger. Okay, the first thing we need to do, I'll pan it out here just a little bit. First thing we need to do, after we get everything cleaned up, got everything lubed, ready to go back together, is to install the sear. Okay, first order of business, you want to install the sear. And you just want to align the hole right there and use your wooden block here to support the housing. And this larger diameter pin is what holds the sear into that trigger group. always keep some type of support underneath your trigger group here, because this is soft metal. Okay, once you've installed the sear, remember that this sear needs to swing freely inside the housing, just like that. Okay, no binding, no catching, nothing like that. Now, we need to go ahead and install the bolt guide pin, put the spring in place. We'll add 1 drop of oil. Remember, a little bit of lube goes a long way. And it goes in the housing just like that. Okay? You want that little bit of tension, that spring action going on there. Now, this tiny little spring, make sure you keep up with these parts now. This little tiny spring here is your safety detent spring, and it goes in this little hole right here. Right there. Okay? And then you've got this little bitty detent plunger. It fits right on top of that spring, just like that. I think you can see that. Fits right there on top. Okay, now it's time to go ahead and install this safety lever, which also doubles as the bolt release activator. Okay, this actually pulls down on that bolt release pin and activates it. I'm going to put a little bit of grease that I've got right here right there where those 2 little holes are, because that's what's going to motivate the safety on and off. Okay, we'll pan out a little bit. Now we got 2 of these pins here, these flat-headed pins. One of them has a little collar on it. Okay, and if you notice, the collar will not fit all the way through the bottom part of this safety lever. So it goes right here. Now we'll go ahead and install the safety lever here and push down on it. Get the sear out of the way there. Push down on it there. Now hold pressure on this. You want to hold pressure down because this is under tension. And now we're going to go ahead and install the retaining clips. I'll hold it in place with the tip of my thumb, snap it in place. Same thing with the other one here. Hold it in place with my thumb, now snap it in place. Okay, once you got it completely reassembled, it should look just like this. It should operate this bolt release pin and the safety at the same time. Okay, before you put the trigger in, we need to go ahead and install this whole unit into the receiver. Take one of your little guide pins here, and we're going to support it. Support the whole thing with this wooden block here. And what I want to look at is that pin right there, that pinhole. Make sure it's aligned. Right there where it goes onto that little bracket that's part of this receiver. And I want to very gently start that pin with real light taps. Then I'll use my punch and go ahead and seat it. Okay. One thing you'll run into is that pin is going to protrude just a little bit right there. We don't want that protruding. I'll zoom in on that. I think you can see that right there, because that's going to interfere with our safety to a certain extent. But we'll go ahead and drive it flush, just like that. That's all that's necessary. Okay, now it's time to install the trigger and the trigger spring. And the way it goes in, simply it drops right in at the rear of the housing, so that the spring sits right on top of this little ledge right here of the trigger, right here on the edge of that, on the rear ledge. And then you just slide your trigger in place. We'll go ahead and put it back on our wooden block here. Make sure it's aligned. I put a little bit of pressure against it right here with the tip of my finger. Alright, now that trigger should work freely inside of the housing. Next, I'm going to go ahead and tighten the set screw here, because right now, as you can see, this trigger is loose. On the action, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down, and this will snug everything into place. We'll go ahead and reinstall the bolt. Engage the safety, squeeze the trigger, nothing happens. Disengage the safety, and it fires. Now that's correctly installed. The safety's working like it should. And the bolt stop's working just like it should. Okay folks, now it's time to go ahead and reinstall the barreled action. We'll go ahead and wipe it down here, get any fingerprints off of the action. this started here. And we'll start the trigger guard. You always want to start your bolts first before you tighten any of them down. You know, get them all started. That way you won't cross thread anything. Okay, I know that one's started. All right, that feels a lot better. I can tell that trigger and sear are fully engaged. All right, I'm going to put a scope on this little rifle and get it sighted in. But for now, I just wanted to cover this little service job here on this Remington 788. And the reason I did this video, folks, is in case anyone owns one of these older models like this, you know, to keep something bad from happening, an accidental discharge or whatever, so that you know the correct way to take the trigger mechanism apart, take it out, clean it, service it, and correctly reinstall it after it's been reassembled. So there it is, folks. I'll probably be making another video on this pretty soon after I get a scope mounted on it, but for now I just wanted to cover the safety issues on these Remington triggers, because there's been a lot of discussion, especially around the Model 700 trigger, which, like I said before in the video, there was never anything wrong with that trigger design. It's simply a matter of maintenance. And there are a lot of videos out on that trigger and also on how to maintain it and improve it. But, you know, if you keep it clean, keep the debris out of it, make sure that the old grease is removed and that it's cleaned up and relubed, it should work just fine. In fact, it doesn't need much lubrication at all. Very little. Now, I should also mention, folks, that if you're not confident in doing this, find a good, competent gunsmith. And, you know, somebody that can handle the job and do it correctly. So with that being said, let me go ahead and close out the video by saying thanks a lot for coming along. I do appreciate you watching very much. And remember, if you like to go hunting, fishing, camping, shooting, hiking, no matter what your outdoor pursuit happens to be, I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. And until next time, make sure you hit that like button, smash the bell icon, and subscribe. That way you'll know when more videos like this one will be coming your way. So folks, take good care of yourselves and get out there and enjoy the great outdoors. I'll be seeing you.